Don't turn me away. The Apache woman who changed the cowboys' fate forever. The wind moved slowly across the wide plains, carrying dust and the smell of dry grass. The land stretched far in every direction, broken only by a small ranch sitting quietly against the horizon. The ranch belonged to a cowboy who had learned long ago that silence was easier than trust. He woke before sunrise every day, not because he loved the early hours, but because sleep rarely stayed long with him. The past had a way of returning at night, bringing memories he preferred to leave behind. So he worked instead. Work was simple. Work did not ask questions. His mornings followed the same pattern. He checked the horses first, running a calm hand along their backs, speaking softly to them in a way he never spoke to people. After that he walked the fences, making sure nothing had broken during the night. The routine helped him keep his thoughts steady. The nearby town sat several miles away. He visited only when necessary, to buy supplies or sell cattle. He spoke little when he went there. People knew him as quiet and reliable, but no one claimed to truly know him. Years earlier, he had been more open, more willing to laugh and share stories. Something had changed him, though he rarely allowed himself to think about exactly what. That evening, the sky darkened earlier than usual. Clouds gathered low and heavy, moving quickly across the plains. The air felt tense, as if the land itself was waiting for something. He finished his chores faster than normal, guiding the animals into shelter before the storm arrived. Rain was rare in that region, but when it came, it arrived with force. Thunder rolled across the sky, and strong wind pushed against the wooden walls of the ranch house. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee, listening to the storm, feeling both restless and strangely calm. Then he noticed movement outside. At first he thought it was one of the horses breaking loose, but the shape was too small and slow. He stood, placing the cup down carefully, and stepped toward the window. Through the rain and dust he saw a figure walking toward the ranch. She moved with effort, each step slow but determined. Even from a distance he could see she was tired. Her clothing showed signs of travel, and her posture carried both strength and exhaustion. He hesitated. Visitors were rare. Unexpected visitors were even more rare. By the time he reached the door, she had stopped near the fence, as if unsure how close she was allowed to come. The storm pushed against her, but she stood steady, waiting. He opened the door but did not step outside immediately. She looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp despite her tiredness, and there was a quiet pride in the way she held herself. "I don't want trouble," she said simply. Her voice was calm, not begging, just honest. "I only need shelter from the storm." He studied her carefully. He noticed the patterns in her clothing, the way she carried herself, and he understood she came from Apache roots. Around the town, that fact alone could create tension. Old stories and old misunderstandings still shaped people's opinions. The wind grew stronger, rain striking harder against the ground. He felt a familiar conflict inside him. Part of him wanted to close the door, to avoid complications, to keep his life simple. Helping someone often meant becoming involved in their problems. But another part of him, a quieter, deeper part, refused to turn away from someone standing alone in a storm. He stepped aside slightly. "You can stay in the barn," he said. "It's dry. There's water." She nodded once, neither overly grateful nor distant, just respectful. He grabbed a lantern and walked ahead, leading her through the rain toward the barn. Inside, the air smelled of hay and horses. The animals shifted but remained calm. He showed her where she could rest, then turned to leave. Before he stepped out, she spoke again.
"Thank you," she said quietly.
He nodded, unsure what else to say. Back inside the house, he sat again at the table, but the silence felt different now. He found himself listening for movement outside, wondering who she was and why she had come so far alone. The storm continued through the night. He told himself she would leave in the morning and things would return to normal. But sleep did not come easily. Thoughts moved through his mind, reminding him of other moments when strangers had changed the direction of his life. He pushed those memories away. Morning arrived slowly, with soft sunlight replacing the heavy clouds. The land looked fresh and clean after the rain. He walked toward the barn, expecting it to be empty. Instead, he found her awake, already helping one of the horses untangle a loose rope. She moved with confidence, clearly familiar with animals. "You know horses?" he said. She gave a small smile. They understand honesty. He wasn't sure why that answer stayed with him. She did not rush to leave, but she also did not assume she could stay. There was a balance in her behavior, respectful without being distant. As the day went on, he found himself watching her from a distance. She worked without being asked, repairing a broken bucket, sweeping part of the barn floor and moving quietly through the space as if she belonged there. He told himself it was temporary, just one night. Still, when the sun began to set again, he realized he had not asked her to leave. Something had shifted. The ranch, once filled only with silence, now carried another presence, calm, steady, and unexpected. He didn't yet understand that this small decision, opening a door during a storm, would begin to change his fate in ways he could not imagine. The morning after the storm felt calm, but the quiet inside the ranch had changed. The cowboy noticed it first in small ways. The sound of footsteps that were not his, the soft movement of someone working without being told, the feeling that the empty space around him was no longer empty. He watched from a distance as the Apache woman moved through the barn. She worked carefully, never rushing, always aware of her surroundings. She did not act like a guest who expected comfort, nor like someone trying to prove herself. She simply did what needed to be done. He finished feeding the horses and stepped outside into the open air. The sky was clear again, wide and bright. The storm had washed away the dust, leaving the land looking almost new. When he returned, she had already fixed a loose latch on one of the stalls. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She shrugged lightly. It was broken. Her answers were always simple, but not cold. He noticed she never spoke more than necessary, yet nothing about her felt distant. They shared a quiet breakfast later that morning. He placed extra food on the table without making a big gesture about it. She accepted with a small nod. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt steady, like two people listening to the same quiet song without needing to speak over it. He asked no questions about where she came from or where she was going. Part of him wanted to know, but another part respected her privacy. She finished eating and washed her dishes without being asked. "You planning to stay long?" he finally asked. She paused before answering, choosing her words carefully. "I don't stay where I'm not wanted." It was not a challenge or a test, just a statement. He considered that for a moment. He realized he had not decided what he wanted yet. "You can stay a little while," he said finally, "until you figure out your next step." She nodded once, accepting without excitement or hesitation. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. She helped with the ranch work naturally, as if she had done it all her life. She moved among the animals with patience, calming even the restless ones. He found himself watching her more than he intended, not because he mistrusted her, but because her presence felt unfamiliar in a way he could not explain. For years he had lived without needing to adjust to another person's habits or moods. Now he noticed things he had ignored before: the way sunlight fell across the yard, the sounds of birds in the early morning. Even the taste of food felt different when shared. One afternoon they rode out together to check a distant fence line. She handled the horse confidently, sitting tall and balanced. The wind moved through her hair as she looked across the open plains with quiet focus. "You grew up riding?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "It teaches patience." He nodded. He understood that. They worked side by side, repairing broken posts and tightening wire. There was no need for many words. Their movements matched naturally, as if they had worked together for years. As the sun lowered, they rested near a small hill overlooking the land. The silence felt peaceful rather than heavy.
"People in town will talk," he said suddenly.
She looked at him calmly. "They always do." Her answer surprised him. She did not sound worried. "Doesn't it bother you?" he asked. "It used to," she said. But people see only what they want to see. You cannot live your life trying to change every mind. Her words stayed with him long after they returned to the ranch. Later that week, he rode into town for supplies. As expected, the questions came quickly. "You got someone staying at your place?" one man asked. He gave a short nod.
"Careful," another warned. "People notice things like that."
He kept his expression neutral and finished his business quickly. He had lived long enough to understand that opinions were often louder than truth. On the ride back, he felt a tension he had not expected. The town's reaction made him realize how easily his quiet life could become complicated. When he reached the ranch, he saw her standing near the fence, watching the horizon. She turned as he approached, studying his face. "Something happened," she said. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Just talk." She nodded slowly. Words can carry weight. He realized she understood more than he had said. That evening they sat outside as the sky turned orange and purple. The air felt warm, carrying the scent of grass and distant rain. For the first time she spoke a little about herself. Not details, just small pieces. She had traveled far. She had learned to depend on herself. She had lost things she once believed would last forever. He listened without interrupting. In return, he shared little, but enough to show he trusted her presence. Days passed, and their routine grew stronger. They worked together in silence, shared meals, and watched the land change with the weather. He noticed something unexpected. He was beginning to look forward to mornings again. One afternoon, a problem arose when a young horse became frightened and refused to calm down. He tried everything he knew, but the animal remained restless. She stepped forward quietly. Instead of forcing control, she moved slowly, speaking softly, giving the horse space until its breathing slowed. He watched with respect. "You understand them," he said afterward. "They understand when someone listens," she replied. Her way of seeing the world felt different from anything he had known. As the days turned into weeks, he realized she had changed the feeling of the ranch without trying. The loneliness he had grown used to felt less heavy. Even the evenings seemed warmer. But with that warmth came uncertainty. He knew she would not stay forever, and he knew the longer she remained, the harder it would be when she left. One evening, as they finished their work, she looked at him thoughtfully. "You don't ask questions," she said. He shrugged. "People tell what they want to tell." She nodded slowly, as if understanding more than he realized. The sun faded behind the hills, leaving the land quiet again. Neither of them knew yet how deeply their lives were becoming connected, or how the choices ahead would test the trust growing between them. But one thing had already changed. The cowboy who once lived only in solitude was no longer alone, and he was beginning to understand that some changes arrive quietly, without warning, yet alter everything. The days moved forward quietly, but something had changed between them. The ranch no longer felt like a place where two strangers simply shared space. Instead, it felt like two lives, slowly learning to move together. The cowboy noticed small details more than before. He noticed how she woke early, often before sunrise, stepping outside to watch the sky turn from dark blue to soft gold. He noticed how she spoke gently to the animals, never rushing them, always patient. One morning he found her sitting near the fence, looking toward the distant hills. "You miss somewhere?" he asked. She thought for a moment before answering. "I miss moments," she said, "not places." He didn't fully understand, but he respected the answer. Their conversations were still simple, but deeper than before. Trust had grown slowly, without force. It showed itself in shared work, in quiet looks, in the way they understood each other without long explanations. As the weather warmed, they spent more time riding together to check the outer areas of the ranch. The wide land felt endless, and riding side by side created a calm rhythm. One afternoon, as they repaired a broken section of fence, she finally spoke more openly about her past. "I left my people," she said quietly. He stopped working and listened. "Not because I stopped caring," she continued, "but because sometimes staying in one place keeps old wounds alive." Her voice remained steady, but he sensed the weight behind her words. I needed distance to understand who I am when I am not defined by pain. He nodded slowly. He understood the need to leave behind things that hurt too much to carry. He shared a small part of his own past in return. Not everything. Just enough to show he knew what it meant to walk away from something important. They worked in silence afterward, but the silence felt warmer, filled with understanding rather than distance. Later that week, trouble arrived unexpectedly. Dark clouds gathered again, but this time it was not only weather that caused tension. A group of riders passed near the ranch, strangers watching from a distance. They did not approach, but their presence left unease behind. The cowboy remained alert. He had learned long ago that caution kept people safe. She noticed his tension. "You think they will come back?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe they just passed through." But he kept checking the fences more often, watching the horizon carefully. That evening, they worked together to secure the animals and prepare for possible trouble. Their movements felt natural, each understanding what needed to be done without needing many words. As night fell, they sat near the fire outside. The flames moved softly, lighting their faces with warm color. "Why did you let me stay?" she asked suddenly. He looked into the fire before answering. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because you didn't ask for more than shelter." She smiled slightly. "Sometimes that is the hardest thing, asking for only what you need." He considered her words long after the conversation ended. The next morning brought a new challenge. One of the calves had wandered too far from the herd and become trapped near a rocky area. Working together, they guided it back safely. During the effort, he saw how fearless she was when facing difficulty. She trusted her instincts and moved with confidence. Afterward, as they rested, he felt something shift inside him. For years, he had believed he worked best alone. Now he realized how much easier things felt with someone beside him who understood the land as deeply as he did. Days turned into weeks. The ranch felt alive with new energy, yet uncertainty remained. He knew she might leave at any time. She had never promised to stay, and the thought of returning to complete silence began to feel heavier than before. One evening they rode to a hill overlooking the ranch. The sky was wide and clear, filled with soft colors as the sun lowered. She spoke again about her journey. "I used to believe strength meant never needing anyone," she said. "But I learned that strength can also mean allowing someone to stand beside you." He listened quietly, feeling the truth of her words. "I was afraid of staying anywhere too long," she added, "afraid that leaving again would hurt more." "And now?" She looked at the horizon for a long time before answering. "Now I am learning that running from connection does not protect the heart. It only keeps it empty." Her honesty stayed with him long after they returned to the ranch. The next day, tension rose again when a man from town arrived unexpectedly. His visit was polite but filled with questions. He hinted that people were talking about the cowboy's choice to allow her to stay. The cowboy remained calm but firm. His decisions were his own. After the visitor left, she stood quietly near the barn. "I do not want to bring trouble to you," she said. He shook his head. "Trouble comes whether you invite it or not." She studied him carefully as if searching for hidden doubt. When she found none, she relaxed slightly. Their bond continued to grow through shared experiences, repairing fences, riding across open land, cooking simple meals together, and watching storms roll across the horizon. The connection between them remained gentle, never rushed or forced. It felt real, built through trust rather than dramatic moments. One night, as they prepared to sleep, she paused at the doorway. "You have changed since I arrived," she said softly. He looked surprised. "How?"
"You laugh more?" she replied.
He realized she was right. After she left, he sat alone for a long time, thinking about how quietly his life had shifted. The walls he had built around himself were no longer as strong. He was beginning to feel again. Not fear, but something hopeful. Outside, the stars filled the sky, bright and endless. Neither of them knew yet that new challenges would soon test everything they had built. But for now, they stood at a point where trust had grown into something deeper, a connection strong enough to change the direction of their lives. The morning was calm, but the air felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. The cowboy noticed it first in the way she moved quietly, checking the horses without speaking, pausing now and then to look out across the plains. She seemed thoughtful, almost distant, though nothing in her face suggested fear or anger. It was something quieter, something he had learned to respect over the past weeks. He had noticed changes in himself too. The loneliness he had carried for so long had begun to lift, replaced by a sense of expectation he hadn't felt in years. He found himself looking forward to her presence, to the sound of her voice, to the small, steady way she moved through the ranch. And he knew that with that expectation came risk. He had learned the hard way that attachment could hurt, but somehow he no longer wanted to turn away. That morning, as he led the horses to the paddock, she followed silently, her hands busy with small tasks. The storm from weeks ago had left the land green and fresh, and the sunlight made the long grasses shimmer. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than emptiness. "Do you ever wonder about the past?" he asked, as he adjusted a fence post. She paused, leaning on the post. "Sometimes," she said, "but I try not to live there." He nodded. "The past can teach us, if we let it, but it can also weigh us down." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the morning light. "You've learned that already."
He smiled faintly.
"Baby." The day passed quietly, filled with work and small conversations. They repaired a section of fence that had been weakened by wind, and she showed him a quicker way to tighten the wire without straining it. He appreciated the skill, but more than that, he appreciated the calm way she guided him, never condescending, just sharing knowledge. In the afternoon, he went to check the distant water trough, a task that took him across the wide stretch of prairie. When he returned, he noticed movement near the edge of the property. A small group of men from town were approaching. Their horses moved slowly, and their eyes seemed to take in everything, lingering on the barn where she had been working. He felt a familiar tension. Outsiders often brought complications, and this time, he knew their attention was likely because of her. As they approached, he waited near the barn, watching, trying to appear calm.
The men nodded politely, but their curiosity was clear.
One asked questions about who was staying there. Another hinted that town gossip had reached their ears. He answered briefly, carefully, giving only the facts necessary. His tone was steady, but inside, he felt the weight of old warnings. He had learned long ago that people often judge before they understand, and now his judgment was being tested. The men eventually left, but the tension remained. He turned to see her standing near the barn door, calm but observant. "You handled that well," she said softly. He shrugged. "It's just talk. Words rarely change the land." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes words are heavier than the land." He considered her statement. She spoke simply, but with depth. Over time, he had begun to trust not only her skill and presence, but also her insight. She saw more than most people, and it was becoming clear that her wisdom could help guide him in ways he hadn't expected. As evening approached, they sat outside near the fire pit. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the air carried a faint chill. The land was quiet, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a sense of peace. "You stay longer than I expected," he said. "I needed to make sure this is a safe place," she replied. "Not just for me, but for you too." She was not just cautious for herself, but for him as well. It was a gesture that spoke louder than any words could. He realized that their connection was no longer just about survival or trust. It was becoming about care, quiet, steady care that neither had expected but both needed. Days passed, and the bond between them deepened. They shared meals, chores, and long walks across the prairie. Each act, no matter how small, became part of a larger rhythm that neither had anticipated. He noticed how her presence eased the solitude he had clung to for so long. He found himself laughing more, thinking more clearly, even sleeping better at night. The ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. But life is rarely without challenges. One evening, she confided something that had been on her mind for weeks. I worry that staying here too long will bring you trouble, she said. I don't want to be the cause of conflict. He looked at her, understanding the weight of her concern. You're not trouble, he said firmly. This land, this life, it's mine to manage. I choose who stays. Her eyes softened. You've changed, she whispered. I think you've changed me, he replied, honestly. Their words hung in the air, unspoken yet clear. Both understood that their connection had grown stronger than either had anticipated. They had become more than strangers sharing space. They had become companions, finding understanding, trust, and quiet care in each other's presence. The next morning brought new challenges. A section of fence had collapsed overnight, likely from a combination of wind and animal activity. They worked together to repair it, side by side. Her hands moved with skill and confidence, and he noticed how naturally their movements aligned. It was a dance of experience and trust, born from necessity, but rich with subtle understanding. Later, they rode out to check the distant boundary of the property. The land stretched endlessly before them, and the sun cast long shadows across the prairie. She spoke quietly of the journey she had taken, the places she had seen, and the lessons she had learned. He listened, offering small observations of his own, but mostly absorbing her perspective. He found her stories grounding, a reminder that life had both challenges and beauty, often in equal measure. As they returned, the cowboy realized something profound. The woman's presence had reshaped the rhythm of his life. Where he had once kept the world at arm's length, now he felt a sense of shared purpose. Where he had feared connection, now he valued it. And though the future remained uncertain, he no longer feared the possibilities it might bring. Night fell, and the stars appeared above the ranch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of grass and distant rain. They sat quietly, side by side, listening to the sounds of the land. No words were necessary. The bond between them was evident in the way they moved, spoke, and simply existed together. In those moments, the cowboy understood that life had a way of bringing unexpected changes. Sometimes a single encounter could reshape the course of years. And sometimes trust and care could heal wounds that solitude had deepened. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the soft firelight. He thought about the journey they had shared so far, the challenges they had faced, and the quiet strength she brought to his life. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that the future might hold more than survival. It might hold hope. The night grew deeper, the prairie calm around them. Neither of them spoke, but both knew that something had shifted irreversibly. They had become more than companions. They had become lifelines for each other, silent but strong, quiet but steady. And in that stillness the cowboy felt a certainty he had not known for years, that life, when shared with someone who truly understands, could change in ways neither expected, bringing courage, trust, and the possibility of something lasting. The morning light broke gently over the horizon, spilling soft gold across the wide prairie. The ranch, which had once been a quiet, lonely place, now felt alive in subtle ways. The wind whispered across the grasses, carrying the scent of fresh earth and the faint tang of smoke from the previous night's fire. The cowboy stepped outside, noticing how the land seemed brighter, warmer somehow, as though the presence of the Apache woman had given it new life. She was already moving through the barn, checking the animals as usual. Her hands were calm, steady, and sure. She paused to glance at him with a small smile, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that spoke more than words ever could. For a long moment he simply watched her, thinking about how much had changed since that stormy night when she had first appeared at his door. He remembered the hesitation, the doubt, the fear of bringing someone into his life, and now he could not imagine the ranch without her. The day started with the usual chores, feeding the horses, repairing fences, checking the water troughs. Yet the routine felt different now, more like a shared rhythm than solitary labor. He noticed how naturally they worked together, the small gestures of coordination and trust that had developed over the past weeks. They would hand him a tool just before he asked for it, or pause to steady a horse when he leaned too heavily on a fence post. These small acts were not romantic or dramatic. but they mattered more than either of them realized. By mid-morning, the woman suggested they ride toward the far boundary of the ranch to inspect a distant fence line. The cowboy agreed, though part of him felt an unease he could not name. He had learned to expect challenges from both the land and people around it. The world was rarely simple, and change, even good change, often carried consequences. As they rode side by side, the vast landscape stretched endlessly before them. The sun warmed their backs, the wind tugged gently at their hats, and the horses moved steadily, as if in understanding of the quiet companionship around them. She spoke little, but when she did, it was with the calm certainty of someone who had lived through storms both literal and metaphorical. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "Not just tomorrow, but the days ahead." He thought about it. For years he had lived as though the future belonged only to work and survival. Trust and hope had felt like luxuries. But now, the thought of a shared future, however uncertain, carried weight. He realized he wanted more than survival. He wanted connection, stability, and perhaps even happiness he had long denied himself. "I do," he admitted, "but it's hard to imagine it when the past keeps showing up." She nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding rather than judgment. "The past teaches," she said, "but it does not have to decide what comes next." Her words lingered in his mind. She had arrived at the ranch weary and guarded, seeking only shelter. And now she had become something far more important. A guide, a partner, someone who could help him see beyond his own limitations and fears. When they reached the fence line, they found a section had been damaged, likely from a fallen branch during the windstorm days before. Working together, they repaired it efficiently. Each movement, each decision, showed the trust that had grown between them. He realized he no longer felt the burden of doing everything alone. Her presence did not weaken him. It strengthened him. As they finished, he noticed her looking out over the prairie, her expression calm but thoughtful. "You've done more than help me with the ranch," he said softly. "You've changed how I see this life, how I see myself." She turned to him, a quiet intensity in her gaze. "I didn't mean to," she said. "It just happened."
And you allowed it to. He smiled faintly, feeling the weight and truth of her words.
He had allowed it because he finally understood that opening himself to trust was not weakness. It was courage. The ride back was peaceful. The horses moved steadily, carrying them over familiar trails. The ranch lay before them, a patchwork of fields, fences, and the small house where he had once lived alone. It felt different now, alive with the promise of shared work, shared care, and perhaps shared life. Over the next days, they continued to strengthen their connection. She spoke more openly about her past, sharing stories of her journey, her experiences, and the people she had known. He listened with patience, never judging, only understanding. In return, he spoke of his own experiences, his losses, and his lessons learned. They began to recognize similarities in their struggles and strengths, forming a quiet but deep bond. Then came the moment that would test them both. One afternoon, a group of travelers approached the ranch. They were polite but curious, their eyes lingering on the Apache woman. Some recognized her heritage and exchanged subtle, wary glances. The cowboy felt the familiar tension rise. He knew that in the eyes of many, their connection could be misunderstood, criticized, or even resented. He walked forward to greet them, introducing himself firmly and calmly. He spoke with quiet confidence, making it clear that the woman's presence was welcome and respected. Their questions were simple, their curiosity natural. But he ensured no words or actions implied judgment or disrespect. By the time the travelers left, the tension had eased, leaving behind only a renewed sense of solidarity between the two. That evening they sat outside near the fire pit. The sky was painted with deep shades of blue and purple, and stars began to appear one by one, scattered across the heavens. The quiet was comfortable, filled with the sounds of the land, distant insects, the rustle of grass, the soft whinny of horses. They spoke little, but each understood that the bond between them had reached a point of quiet permanence. "You've taught me something important," the cowboy said finally. "You've shown me that life doesn't have to be so lonely. That trust isn't dangerous. It can be life-saving." She nodded, her expression calm, but reflective. "And you've shown me that people can change, that the past doesn't have to define the future, that safety and kindness are still possible." Their shared understanding created a moment of quiet intimacy, not in words or gestures, but in presence. They did not rush to define it or name it. It simply existed, solid, quiet, and real. In the following weeks, they continued to build their life together on the ranch. She helped with every task, from feeding the animals to repairing fences, from preparing meals to guiding the younger horses during training. Each day, their rhythm became more synchronized, their actions more instinctive. And in quiet moments, sitting outside at night, riding through the prairie or sharing a meal, they felt a growing sense of home, not just in the land, but in each other. Eventually, they faced challenges that tested their trust. Harsh weather returned briefly, threatening crops and fences. Problems arose that required quick thinking and cooperation. Each obstacle was met with calm determination, as if the land itself recognized the partnership that had formed. They relied on each other, communicated without words, and solved problems together. And each time they overcame a challenge, their bond strengthened further. By the time spring turned fully to summer, the ranch had changed. It felt vibrant, alive, and full of possibility. And the cowboy realized something he had not known he needed. He had found a partner, a companion, and someone whose presence had reshaped not only his life but the way he viewed the world. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the Apache woman spoke softly, almost to herself. "I never thought I would find a place where I could belong again." He turned to her, understanding immediately what she meant. "You belong here," he said simply. "With this land. With me. If you choose to stay." She looked at him, eyes reflecting the warm glow of the setting sun. She nodded, a small, quiet affirmation, but one that carried the weight of commitment. The air between them felt lighter, freer. They had come through uncertainty, judgment, and the long shadows of the past, and now they could face the future together. That night, as stars blanketed the sky, they sat quietly by the fire, the sound of crickets and distant nightbirds filling the silence. No words were necessary. They had already said everything through their shared work, mutual respect, and unwavering trust. The cowboy realized then that the storm that had brought her to his door was only the beginning. She had not only survived the journey but had changed his life entirely. She had reminded him of hope, trust, and the possibility of something lasting. And he, in turn, had shown her that kindness and safety could exist even in a world that often judged too quickly. As the fire's glow faded and night deepened, they looked out across the prairie, the endless land stretching before them. Both understood that life would continue to bring challenges, but now they had each other, and with that, they could face anything. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt certain of one thing. Life was no longer a series of solitary steps, measured only by survival. Life was shared, full of purpose, and rich with connection. And in that realization, both of them found the quiet, unspoken promise of a future built together, steady, strong, and lasting.